Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel, and today we're diving into one of the most dramatic and controversial moments in modern military aviation. A moment that sent shockwaves across the region and had both nations on high alert. This is the story of when a Venezuelan F-16 dove toward a U.S. aircraft carrier, triggering a chain of reactions that stunned observers, intensified tensions, and revealed just how quickly a misunderstanding in the skies can escalate into a dangerous confrontation. In this video script, we'll break down what happened, why it happened, how both sides reacted, and what the world learned from this high-stakes encounter that almost spiraled into something far more serious. So sit tight, because this story moves fast, and the tension only rises with every second. The incident began when U.S. naval forces were operating in international waters near the Caribbean region, conducting routine exercises that the U.S. Navy performs multiple times a year. These exercises are designed to maintain readiness, sharpen response capabilities, and test communication systems under real-world conditions. But whenever U.S. military activity shifts closer to contested regions, reactions can be unpredictable. Venezuela has long viewed U.S. operations near its claimed maritime zones as provocative, and officials in Caracas have frequently accused the United States of monitoring their military facilities and challenging their sovereignty. Against this backdrop, tensions were already high, and any unusual movement in the skies had the potential to ignite suspicion. As the U.S. aircraft carrier group moved through the designated exercise area, its radar systems detected a Venezuelan Air Force F-16 taking off and climbing toward an altitude that matched typical interception patterns. At first, the U.S. fleet noted the fighter jet as a standard patrol aircraft, something that happens often in regions where militaries monitor nearby activity. But what caught their attention was the jet's sudden change in speed. Instead of maintaining its course, the Venezuelan F-16 accelerated rapidly and began descending at a steep angle directly toward the U.S. carrier's flight path. This maneuver was unusual enough for the carrier's command center to issue an immediate alert, placing the fleet on a heightened defensive posture. From the Venezuelan perspective, the pilot was reportedly acting under orders to identify the U.S. naval activity and show presence. Venezuelan leadership has historically used such aerial displays as a symbolic gesture, signaling that they are watching and ready to defend their territory. However, whether the pilot intended to simulate an aggressive dive, perform a reconnaissance pass, or simply assert authority remains unclear. Communication between both sides quickly became strained because neither military had direct, real-time contact established at the moment. Without open channels, actions were left to interpretation, and interpretations during military operations can become dangerously subjective. As the F-16 continued its dive, U.S. aircraft on deck were placed on stand-by. Defensive systems were activated but not locked onto the Venezuelan jet, a deliberate move to avoid escalating the situation. The U.S. Navy has protocols designed to prevent snap decisions, especially when dealing with aircraft from nations that might be acting unpredictably but not necessarily hostile. Still, every second counted. The closer the F-16 approached, the harder it became to determine whether this was a show of force, a test, a miscalculation, or something far more threatening. Inside the F-16 cockpit, the Venezuelan pilot was likely experiencing his own version of confusion and pressure. On one hand, he may have been attempting to carry out an assertive maneuver to send a political message. On the other, approaching too close could easily be seen as hostile, triggering a defensive response from the carrier group. Fighter jet pilots train for scenarios like this, but real, World tensions add layers of complexity that no simulator can fully replicate. The margin for error becomes razor thin, and every move can determine whether the encounter ends with radio chatter or an international crisis. Eventually, the U.S. fleet decided to deploy two F/A-18 Super Hornets from the carrier's deck. Their mission was not to attack but to intercept and escort. These jets are fast, maneuverable, and capable of reaching the Venezuelan fighter in seconds. Their launch created a clear message in the sky: the U.S. would not tolerate unpredictable maneuvers near its carrier. As the Super Hornets climbed and closed the distance, radar operators monitored every detail. The Venezuelan jet continued descending, but its trajectory began to shift slightly, indicating that the pilot was now aware of the U.S. response. The intercepting fighters reached visual contact with the Venezuelan F-16 as it leveled out of its dive. The tension peaked at this moment because one wrong movement from any of the jets could have set off a defensive cascade. But instead of challenging the Hornets, the Venezuelan pilot maintained his distance. The U.S. pilots used non-aggressive formation, flying to signal a warning, keeping the Venezuelan jet from approaching any closer to the carrier. For several long seconds, the fighters flew parallel in tense silence, neither side making any sudden moves. Finally, the Venezuelan F-16 banked away, climbing back toward its earlier patrol altitude. The Super Hornets shadowed it for a brief distance to ensure it was returning to Venezuelan controlled airspace. Once the U.S. pilots confirmed the F-16 had disengaged, they circled back toward the carrier. The incident was over, but the political ripple effects were just beginning. While no shots were fired and no aircraft were damaged, the entire event raised serious questions about communication failures, political motivations, and the risk of unintended escalation. In the aftermath, official statements from both nations painted different pictures. U.S. officials described the maneuver as unsafe and unnecessary, a reckless action that could have resulted in a dangerous misunderstanding. They emphasized that U.S. forces had operated in international waters and followed all established procedures. Venezuelan officials responded by accusing the U.S. Navy of provoking them, arguing that foreign military exercises near their coast naturally trigger defensive reactions. Each side defended its actions, further solidifying the political divide. Analysts around the world dissected the incident from multiple angles. Some believed the Venezuelan pilot intended a show of force, highlighting national strength during a period of internal political tension. Others suggested it may have been an attempt to gather intelligence or test U.S. reaction time. There were also those who proposed a simpler explanation. The pilot misjudged his maneuver, diving closer than intended in an effort to reposition for a better visual assessment. In high-stress military environments, even seasoned pilots can make errors in judgment, especially when balancing political expectations with real-time risk. But the deeper issue exposed by the incident is the inherent danger of close encounters between military forces from nations with strained diplomatic relations. History is filled with examples where a single misstep, miscommunication, or misinterpreted movement led to full-scale confrontations. With modern aircraft capable of traveling at extreme speeds, decision windows become incredibly short. A pilot has only seconds to choose between disengaging or pressing forward. A radar operator has moments to determine whether something is a threat, and a commander must decide whether to wait or act immediately. These razor-thin margins make encounters like this inherently risky. Another significant takeaway from the incident was the importance of establishing reliable communication channels. Had there been a direct line between Venezuelan command and the U.S. Navy at that moment, the entire situation might have been resolved with a simple clarification. Instead, both sides were forced to interpret each other's actions without certainty. When militaries operate in close proximity, communication becomes just as critical as radar, strategy, or firepower. Without it, the risk of escalation increases dramatically. This event also highlighted the role of political theater in military engagements. Nations often use military maneuvers as signals, messages intended for both adversaries and domestic audiences. These messages, however, are not always interpreted correctly. Something meant as a symbolic gesture can be read as a threat. Something intended as a warning can be seen as aggression. And when fighter jets and warships are involved, mistaken interpretations can turn symbolic gestures into dangerous confrontations. In the days following the encounter, the U.S. Navy reviewed its operating procedures, ensuring that the fleet responded appropriately under the rules of engagement. The Venezuelan Air Force likewise analyzed the pilot's maneuvers, debating whether he acted within acceptable limits. Both militaries publicly stated their commitment to avoiding future incidents, but privately, each side understood that such encounters could happen again. The region remains fraught with tension, and as long as both nations conduct operations near each other, the potential for dangerous aerial interactions will remain. Though the situation ended peacefully, it served as a reminder of how fragile peace can be when military forces maneuver in close quarters. Modern technology allows for rapid detection and rapid response, but it also means conflicts can escalate faster than leaders can intervene. What started as a single jet diving toward a carrier could have easily ignited a much larger confrontation. The professionalism of the pilots and the discipline of the naval command prevented that outcome, but it was a close call nonetheless. For the international community, the incident became a case study on the importance of restraint. It showed that even in moments of intense tension, measured decisions can prevent disaster. The U.S. Navy's choice to intercept rather than engage, and the Venezuelan pilot's eventual decision to disengage, both demonstrated the power of disciplined military behavior. Not every incident ends this way, and that is what made this encounter so notable. It balanced on a knife's edge but ultimately stepped back from conflict. In the years since, military analysts and scholars continue to reference the encounter as an example of how quickly skies over contested regions can turn dangerous. It also stands as a reminder that technology, while powerful, cannot replace judgment. A radar system can detect a jet, but it cannot interpret intent. A missile system can lock on, but it cannot decide whether firing is necessary. Human decision-making remains the determining factor, and in this case, good judgment prevented catastrophe. So when the Venezuelan F-16 dove toward the U.S. aircraft carrier, it created a moment of intense uncertainty that brought two nations to the brink of a potential clash. But in the end, what happened was a demonstration of calculated restraint, skillful piloting, and disciplined response. The incident ended with no weapons fired, no aircraft downed, and no lives lost. Instead, it became a lesson one worth studying and remembering about how quickly the skies can heat up, and how important it is for militaries to remain calm under pressure. And that brings us to the end of this story. It's a powerful reminder of how a single maneuver in the sky can change the tone of international relations in an instant. Whenever rival nations operate near each other, tension will always be present, but professionalism can prevent that tension from turning into disaster. If you enjoyed this deep dive and want more breakdowns of high-stakes military encounters and the stories behind them, make sure to stay tuned for the next video.